Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Bubbleman's World and welcome to Hash Church 2.0, episode 7. Kind of threw this one together on a whim today. Didn't have any invites that I put together or anything like that. Just figured, hey, we've got the ability to stream. We should get this happening and put another stream together. So that is what I did. I'm going to put the invitations out via email and Facebook and Messenger. So we'll see how that goes real quickly here. Boom, boom, shaboom. Hopefully Mr. Scialdone, Mr. Dr. Scialdone will pop in and share some goodness with us today. Forrest says that his internet is down. Etienne says he's taken the day off. And you got to respect that for a guy that's pretty much been here for every single Hash Church episode. Already 171 viewers in the house. Johnny B comes in and blows my eardrums out. Classic. Probably on a phone or something. That was so loud, Johnny B. Wow. Good to see you, though. He's like, uh-oh, I'm afraid to unmute it. I might blow his eardrums out again. Oh, you got to love it, Johnny B. Classic Johnny B. Hey, what's going on, Dr. Mark?
Hey, Marcus. How are you?
I'm good, dude. How about yourself?
Good. All's well.
It's been a while.
Yeah, certainly has.
Tell ya. What's been new and different in the world of Dr. Mark? Concerts and chemistry?
Yeah, well, been busy starting up a couple facilities. One about 2 hours south of where I live in Maryland, and got a couple other projects going on in other states. But still working on the hydrogenation and have a potential collaboration to do the pharmacology on that. But we're in discussion right now with a licensed producer in California to do a limited introduction of, I think we're going to make like 1,000 pens or maybe like 1,500 pens. I'm not sure. It's still in sort of negotiation, but we're still, developing the hydrogenation technology and getting labs started up in multiple different states. I have projects in Florida, North Dakota, Ohio. The Pennsylvania project was sort of put on hold because there's a lawsuit. The existing license holders right now are suing the state to put a hold on their clinical program. So that's kind of a bummer.
That is a bummer.
And so the group that I'm associated with is sort of like taking a hiatus until that issue gets resolved. But, this is basically groups that are, consists of like myself as a processing guy, like a cultivation team, a security team, and basically putting together a plan to retrofit existing facilities, or in some cases build entirely new buildings for, the purpose of, growing and cultivating cannabis, and in most cases, because I'm associated with it, processing into oils and formulated products. So the regulations are all different in different states, but basically it's the same, type of process that, you would use for any type of botanical essential oil. And so, so a lot of these states are allowing solvent and non-solvent extraction methods. Some folks are sort of limiting their processing right now. I know folks who are doing only CO2. We're choosing to do solventless, rosin and butane extracts, just because the butane extracts are very popular category right now amongst these new states. But the introduction of concentrates to the markets in Pennsylvania and Maryland has been very successful, and we're seeing incredible growth and great Tamir, who worked with Kind Bill out in Colorado, is now running in a lab in Cresco in Pennsylvania, and they're doing really, really well. They can't keep their concentrates on the shelf, so things are going well in the rollout of cannabis facilities out east in the United States. It's great. It's good to report.
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin.
Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning, everyone. How you doing?
Oh, another Sunday, another Hash Church episode 7 this time. Figured we'd, throw one together without any organization whatsoever. Just sort of do it old school, see who's around, see what the conversation can, what we can come up with.
Isn't that how we started this whole? Very good. Very good.
Yeah, is that your YouTube? Is someone left their YouTube on that I can hear myself talking through, just out of curiosity? Welcome, Skunkman Sam. Yeah, is that your YouTube? Is someone left their YouTube on? Oh, it's Sam's. I can hear it through Sam's.
Hash Church foul.
Well, you know what? I did it, but I had my headphones on this morning, so it didn't. Nobody heard it except me, but I definitely did it. Hey, anyone got melt? Well, you know what? I did it, but I had my headphones on this morning, so it didn't. Turn your YouTube off, Sam.
I got melt.
Anyone got melt?
I screwed up on a melty Friday there, but I've been sifting away here this morning. I'm trying.
Well, go to the YouTube and then mute it, or just shut it off completely.
So that's my deal.
Awesome. Welcome, Johnny B. Welcome. And I was, and I had a question, Mark, in regards to your hydrogenation process. I'm not really fully understanding exactly what's going on there, what the benefits are, how you came up with this. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a I'm sure you've talked about it before, but just sort of for the people like myself.
Sure.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. So what we do when we convert the tetrahydrocannabinoids, which are in the plant, to the hexahydrocannabinoids, is we're adding a molecule of hydrogen across the double bond of the molecule THCA or CBDA or whatever we're hydrogenating in the plant. So the double bond is the if you're looking at the structure of THCA, it's sort of like the chicken wire representation, sort of like of what the molecule looks like. There's the top ring, and at the top of the ring, the top of the 3 rings there's a double bond, and that double bond is eliminated when it's hydrogenated. So we're saturating the double bond by adding hydrogen to it and making it go away. So whether it's delta 8 or delta 9, those are different positions, different isomeric positions of the double bond. And depending on which isomer you have, it doesn't make a difference anymore because we've hydrogenated it. So the hydrogenation basically is a way of converting the tetrahydrocannabinoids that are in the plant into the hexahydrocannabinoids, which is what HHCA is. So does that make sense?
I mean, that makes pretty damn good sense. And what have you seen sort of beneficial from turning tetra to hexa?
So the data that we had presented in our patent was some data that showed that mice that were implanted with glioblastoma tumors had slightly smaller tumors when they had a diet of the hydrogenated cannabinoids versus the diet of their non-hydrogenated starting material. And that was part of the reason why we got an invention on it, because you couldn't have predicted that result until we carried it out. And it was like new and unexpected. It's like, ooh, surprisingly, we find that. And so the reduction in tumor size was just a little bit smaller in the hydrogenated cannabinoids. And that might have to do with, again, they have different metabolic profiles in the body, and so how they're degraded and what kind of half-life they may or may not have, and what kind of activity is directly tied to making those tumors slightly smaller. I mean, the mice that had no cannabinoids administered at all had, much larger tumors. So the cannabinoids in the diet showed a reduction in tumor size, but, ultimately this is something that, it was just used to show that these things do have biological activity for the utility on the patent.
Hey, Mark, I'm curious if are there ways to get several double bonds in the resorcinol moiety on THC? Did those things get hydrogenated as well when you guys treat this?
No, so just the single double bond, the methyl cyclohexene group, so the benzene
So
stable and does not hydrogenate. But another thing that we were able to show is that we can hydrogenate the acid group itself. And when we hydrogenate the acid group, we make a hydroxymethyl. So we convert what used to be a carboxylic acid into now a hydroxymethyl group, which is a novel composition of matter that we have covered in our patent. So we're sort of developing, ways to not only, and when you do the hydrogenation, this is an important aspect of it too, it generates two diastereomers, because the hydrogenation could happen from the top side of the molecule, which pushes the methyl group back and makes a stereocenter, because the new stereocenter is a tetrahedral carbon, which is asymmetric, right? And so the methyl group will go sort of like down into the plane of the computer screen, or if the catalyst comes from underneath, the methyl group goes outside the computer screen. So those are
those could both have, those get different properties, right?
Right. A right-handed and a left-handed diastereomer. So last year, a group at the University of Pennsylvania collaborated with El Soli and published a paper on the modeling of oxygenated cannabinoids inside the CB1 receptor site. As you all know now, the CB1 receptor site's crystal structure has been solved by basically crystallizing a high affinity ligand for the receptor and basically doing very, very sophisticated crystallography work tied together with computation to basically solve what the inside of these receptors look like. So I've started a collaboration with the group up at UPenn on modeling hydrogenated cannabinoids. As it turns out, that part of the active site is very sterically promiscuous in that there can accommodate a lot of different stereochemical baggage, if you will, or clutter, because there's a huge hydrophobic cleft or cavity inside the active site of CB1. And so we're actually modeling both the right-handed and the left-handed diastereomer inside the active site, and definitely seeing some slight differences between the diastereomers. We don't have them separated just yet. I can separate them chromatographically by HPLC. So I would need to do them by PREP HPLC, and I'm still working on a method for that and basically carrying that out to basically separate the two diastereomers that are made when pure crystalline delta 9, which is purified and isolated, and we have really very good NMR data to say that's very, very pure. When we hydrogenate that, we see about a 1-to-1 mixture of each of the diastereomers, so we're trying to separate those right now. But again, under slightly different reaction conditions, we could reduce the acids down to the hydroxymethyl groups, which create abundant opportunities now to do further chemistry to see how far we can push new groups into that hydrophobic pocket of CB1. And we just don't know, because these compounds have never been made before, but we'll start making a whole bunch of derivatives here and testing them. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, we put out a paper maybe a year or so ago on DNA variants in CNR1 that may have an impact on the structure. Who was it? It was gentleman. It was Mckernan lab up here in Boston that I think played a role in that crystal structure. But they're up there. They probably are too rare in the population for you guys to be concerned with right now. But they're an interesting dynamic. That crystal structure has helped tremendously, being able to now predict things like this. which is great.
Are you guys going to be present at the ICRS in Leiden, Holland next month?
I will not be. I've got another conflicting thing this year, but looking forward to next year.
Yeah, I've never been before. This will be my first year. I know Sam's been going for decades or whatnot, however long it's been around for, but this will be my first year. I'm looking very forward to it. It seems like what you've been doing, Mark, would be very much up their alley for a presentation, though.
Yeah, I've been dying to go, and I'm not going this year. I forget why. It must conflict with the fish show.
That's probably it.
or something. I forget the reason why I'm not going, but I discussed this with Ryan at length. And Ryan had been tugging on me to go for years, Marcus. And yes, definitely, I'm going to go. It's just not this particular one, but yes.
So Sam, you just can't figure out how to shut off the YouTube chat, so we don't have to hear our voices coming through your microphone. It's just a mute button on YouTube. I'm gonna mute it for now because I can't. That's like my pet peeve numero uno. But I'm sure he'll figure out how to shut off the YouTube chat. It's different from the Google chat. You go into the YouTube chat where the actual chat is happening, and you just mute the talking on there, and you can turn the sound right down, or you can click the little bell and it'll just mute. But yeah, that's or just shut it completely off. If you just close the whole page, it'll also stop. So that's super interesting, Mark. I don't know why I didn't really catch on to that the other times that you explained that, but that's very just unique.
Yeah, I mean, I had worked on this project while I was employed at DuPont to take catmint oil, which we obtain by steam distillation, and then hydrogenate that oil. So catmint oil itself is a very fragrant, pungent, almost very overly powering herbaceous material, and it itself is a good insect repellent. But when it's hydrogenated, it improves the fragrance of the material from loud, herbaceous, like freshly mowed grass, like not very pleasant, to lemony, minty with a hint of licorice. And so the notion is that, we just took this plant oil, which is rich with unsaturated compounds, and did a chemical modification of the plant oil to improve its stability, fragrance, shelf life. Typically hydrogenation is used to improve shelf life. And everybody always asks me, and they'd say, well, hydrogenation of vegetable fat, that's not good because it makes trans fats. And that's true, that trans fats are made in that process. But when we hydrogenate extracts, we're hydrogenating extracts that are highly refined and either, crystalline. And we did hydrogenate some sauces, some sort of terpene rich extracts that would be sort of fall into that sauce category. So there was a lot of terpenes in there. And in the hydrogenation process, the terpenes are hydrogenated as well. And so each different genetic, which has a different expression in different terpene profiles, all will have a different now profile of hydrogenated terpenes. And, we don't even begin to think that we can even begin to understand what that does, or, we need to explore that thoroughly and find out, like when you hydrogenate myrcene, for example, you take it down to a fully saturated hydrocarbon, it's now more like a solvent than fragrant molecule. So to understand like the impact that has on all of the terpenes is just a really monumental challenge.
Are there any ways to accidentally hydrogenate?
Yeah, the answer to that.
I asked that as a question because I don't know how much of that is public, but it seems as if that might
so
happen.
That's just a can of worms there. So it turns out we found out, and this was again a connection that Kevin had made. Thank you very much, Kevin. Of a group that was out in Vegas that was unintentionally hydrogenating some distillate while they were making it, and they didn't know it. And the chemist who had actually looked at this, actually wasn't a chemist, he was a microbiologist by training, but a really sharp guy, was able to figure it out and knew about our stuff. I think from Hash Church, right? Isn't that right, Kevin? Or he knew about it from you?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he knew about it because he knew about me, because he knew about the patent, and so he and I don't exactly know like how that whole thing resolved, because the group that regulates that market is what, the Division of Taxation, City of Las Vegas or something like that. And this was brought up at one of the hearings of the thing, and I don't exactly know what the fate of it was, but yeah. So the molecules are prone to hydrogenation if given the right conditions, and these people in their distillate process was somehow beating on the molecule in the right way to add hydrogen to it. So we need to figure out exactly, get to the bottom of that and find out, what's going on there.
So do you have to like get the terpenes out separate, you think, so that you isolate the cannabinoids and only hydrogenate those and then add the terps back, just to not concern? I mean, because there's, as you say, that's like, if you hydrogenate everything, entourage effect that is
Right.
completely different.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the chemical modification of what the plant provides is a different, thing of doing it to the active ingredient itself. So we've been, most of our focus has been on the active ingredient itself, just to make sure that we understand, the structure itself, and so we're collaborating, and I think you may have been useful in helping set this up, Kevin. I don't know, because it took several interactions and several phone calls, but Guillermo Moreno Sanz, who now is affiliated with the university over in Spain, is actually the one that's going to be doing our CB1 binding studies for us. As it turns out, it's still exceedingly difficult to do that in the United States for all the Schedule I bullshit reasons. But we do have some other interest from the researchers up at Temple. So I've touched base with Sarah Jane Ward up there, who has a mouse test for pain induced by chemotherapy. That's a very interesting, again, test for cannabinoids. And it's really important too for us to get it into this ALS mouse test that Mary Abood has up at Temple. And again, there's just stupid regulations that keeps things from happening and keeps us from being able to have access to these researchers who are actually paid with government funding, my tax dollars, which go to these government agencies, which give funding to professors that have assays from my compound that I can't test because of some government bullshit, which just totally sucks. But anyway, I don't know how I diverted that. Yeah, so the important thing is that we're focusing on the active ingredient itself, and we want to make direct comparisons with what the hydrogenation does to the cannabinoids and what it does compared to their non-hydrogenated counterparts, and see if we can understand, again, from a molecular point of view, once we look at the binding and see, does it gain from having this hydrogenation, and perhaps, again, a different metabolic fate that these cannabinoids may have might change their pharmacokinetic profile, which really impacts on how effective they are and their duration of activity once they're administered to humans.
Going deep.
Yeah, man.
That's intense, but definitely also making sense what Kevin said in regards to potentially doing the cannabinoids and reintroducing the terpenes, especially if you're turning the terpenes into like full-blown solvents in the case of myrcene.
Yeah, well, in the case of like beta-caryophyllene, so beta-caryophyllene, as it turns out, is a component in catmint oil. And so when we hydrogenated catmint oil, we also hydrogenated beta-caryophyllene, and it turns it into something called caryophyllene, and humulene into humulane. So these are known, compounds, yeah. And I guess again, yeah, when you take what nature provides in the botanical mixture within the plant, and now you're doing a chemical modification to that plant, and you're modifying everything in the plant, yeah, you're rolling the dice on, say, a negative type of synergistic or entourage or ensemble effect, right? Where things could basically synergize in a negative way. So we need to totally understand, what the impact that has, and the safety, and ultimately like how that really, does improve or does not improve the activity of these compounds.
And someone was asking in regards to something about Delta 8 being produced. Is that happening in the hydrogenation?
Yeah, well, what we found is that very, very sporadically, this was just a test that we had not really run before, but when we had first done a hydrogenation, we let it go overnight, Marcus, where we're shaking the hydrogenation overnight. And when we worked it up the next day, we had about a 22% mixture of the Delta 8 acid in there, which nobody had actually, or it turns out Meshulam had characterized it once before. So I have to correct myself. There's a one paper, and it's was presented to me when I was at the ACS meeting in New Orleans last month, or a couple months ago, where Delta 8 acid was once before reported in the literature, but it's very, very extremely rare. And so Delta 8 acid is actually made by the isomerization of the Delta 9 acid, which is made in the plant, to Delta 8. And it's just very rare to observe that. And so we observed that and characterized it by HPLC mass spec. So that was a paper that I gave at the New Orleans ACS meeting. But yeah, you could hydrogenate Delta 8. I mean, it doesn't matter where the double bond is. And what's even more exciting, to talk about THC isomers for a second, is that there seems to be a preponderance of thinking that in a lot of people's distillate that the Delta 10 isomer is showing up. And Delta 10, we could easily envision just being an isomerization of the double bond into conjugation with the aromatic ring, which is basically going to introduce a little bit of ring strain because it's a tricyclic system, but you gain a little bit of energy because you're dropping that double bond now into conjugation. Well, the other thing is that proton, the benzylic proton there, is highly resolvable in the proton NMR. And what that means is that if we are forming Delta 10, that we'll be able to totally see the disappearance of that proton in the NMR. So right now, a fellow by the name of Zach Jordan, who I think is a Hash Church watcher, he's a moderator of a couple different Facebook pages around distillation. I think he sells equipment and builds rooms and stuff like that. A fellow named Zach Jordan is actually going to be providing a sample to the group over in Fort Collins to run a NMR of that, and we'll be able to see, again, try to characterize whether or not this Delta 10 isomer, a lot of people are characterizing it as CBG just because that's where CBG runs in the HPLC, or not even CBG, but it's like CBGA. And it totally can't be CBGA because it's in distillate. There's no A in distillate, right? Everything's decarboxylated. So people just don't know what it is. It's this phantom peak that's in a lot of people's distillate. There's a lot of us who think that it's probably Delta 10. It'll be great to not only identify it as Delta 10 THC, but then a potential financial opportunity for whoever could come up with the right process to make standards of Delta 10, because those standards go for a lot of money. And they have to be sold at the DEA dilution and all that kind of shit. And I think you even need a schedule and license to produce those, if I remember correctly. But it's just, again, another isomer that's in distillate that's been mischaracterized for years. And we think
Mark, were the
might be
analytical results for Delta 8?
Delta 10. The last thing I just wanted to say about cannabinoids, because we're starting to get testing results at our group down in Maryland, is, a lot of people are testing for the propyl cannabinoids, CBDV and THCV, but they're not testing for the corresponding acids, so THCVA and CBDVA. So I'd be interested if anyone knows about whether or not those are being tested for, or in other places, or anyone knows about origins of standards for those.
Right?
I think that's one of the things that Steve Hill will get back to me and say, well, we can only test for them if we have standards available. So it's kind of like chicken or the egg. You really need the standards in order to basically be able to identify them for sure in the chromatogram, and then be able to do, a suitable concentration dilution curve to make sure that your response factor between peak height or whatever you're measuring is linear with concentration. Is that right? So you want to do like a couple series of 10-fold dilutions, do those injections in your HPLC, make sure you get a beautiful linear correlation, and then that you can basically make those assignments. And maybe, again, this is, tightening up part of the uncertainty of when you do, cannabinoid analysis of concentrates and extracts, and you only get like numbers that add up to, 85 or 90%. What the hell's the rest of it,
You want that acid form in there, right? Because you should be able to use the acid forms as a QC in many ways. Do you see the same acid to decarboxylation ratio in the propyl versus the pentyl molecules, right? In any sort of extraction, you should sort of see. I know they differentially decarboxylate to some degree, but you shouldn't see those ratios.
You do an HPLC analysis, Kevin, of an extract that was taken at very low temperature. There's no reason to believe you have. In fact, we see very little, decarboxylation. So just wondering if anybody else had known about whether or not people are testing for the acids of the propyl cannabinoids. That's the real question. If anyone knows about it.
I don't know offhand. I'll look into the folks that I know, but it'd certainly be helpful to get an LCMS on there, just so you're not questioning whether, if you don't have a standard, you don't need one. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again,
quantitated.
This speaks to, again, being able to hijack these pathways and put them in the yeast, and be able to get yeast to express cannabinoids expressly for making the analytical standards. So now there's no, uncertainty about making, whatever. That yeast is only spitting out that molecule. I mean, this is why, again, modern techniques in biotechnology can be utilized and harnessed in the industry for these types of reasons.
Do you see any microbial hydrogenation that could be at play, or is that mostly hydroxynate stuff on the tails?
Yeah, actually the hallmark of microbial degradation is oxidation, right? I mean, so typically, like when you looked at those compounds that El Soli had claimed as, new cannabinoids, they weren't new cannabinoids. They were the existing cannabinoids that were chewed on by bacteria and other bugs to basically hydroxylate them. So bugs like to hydroxylate stuff because they're turning stuff into food and ultimately trying to mineralize the carbon into CO2. But you're basically pseudomonad bacterias and all these other bacterias and all these other fungi basically start hydroxylating the shit out of stuff. And I mean, that's how the degradation of wood and wood pulp and cellulose. And if you bury paper in the soil and you come back a couple of weeks later, it's gone, right? It's because these, bacteria basically just depolymerize cellulose by Fenton chemistry, which is single electron chemistry that, that you could certainly intervene in. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of chemistry that's going on in the soil. Well, I don't even know if that was the answer to that question.
No, I think you did. I've seen the similar papers on hydroxynation as well, and that's different than what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, typically, if you think about, again, bacterial yeah, and just even oxidation in the liver and most like what's going on. And that's again where perhaps hydrogenation could help, because the sites typically of both metabolic and thermooxidative degradation are in the proximity of where those double bonds and those degrees of unsaturation are. So perhaps, again, just perhaps, the metabolic fate of these molecules will influence their pharmacokinetics enough to perhaps lower their effective dose. That's just a hypothesis right now, but a testable one.
That's some high caliber scientific talk for 9:30 a.m. in the morning here on the West Coast. Welcome to Wade Laughter in the room. That was heavy, huh, Wade?
Thank you, Marcus. Yes, I was just about to speak up and say that I have deep gratitude for the people who are willing to do the deep work on what all's going on with our various processes. I wanted to thank Kevin for posting a link to Arno Hazekamp's paper on various extraction techniques. I was really struck by, he was doing naphtha, ethanol, I don't remember all of the reagents, but the one that stuck out to me was olive oil as a solvent for, and doing a water and oil extraction of plant material and getting really good results on keeping the terpenes and a full range of cannabinoids. And you guys have, like, as you said, Marcus, it's Sunday morning on the West Coast, and that was really deep conversation for Sunday morning for me. But I was really struck by would the science guys, Mark or Kevin or you, Marcus, talk about what's going on with olive oil. I know the challenge for the work that I do is concentrating it, getting enough cannabinoids into a olive oil extraction to be meaningful for some of the folks we're trying to help. But I was really struck by the results I saw in that paper suggested that there was really good extraction. And that's something people can do in their kitchen at home and grow their own medicine. And this is a thing that's really important from my point of view, is that we all should have access to this plant in whatever form we want to use it. It's not a harmful thing for anybody. You can abuse it and overuse it, but like I said, the way Mark and Kevin and so many other people are really digging at the science of what's going on with cannabis and humans and animals. I really want people as much as possible to be able to make this medicine for themselves, to be able to concentrate it into a form that's useful for their bodies or their families. And you guys know so much about all the different ways this plant gets played with. And I know there's people who are listening that probably know more about this than me, but like I said, I was really struck by that paper. So I wanted to thank you, Kevin, for posting it. And now I'm going to shush and let some other folks talk, because like I said, to me, the real key here is normalizing cannabis, helping people understand that it's not just about how high can you get, which is a beautiful side effect that I personally love very much, but it's also really is a healing plant. And making it available to people is a game-changing thing on so many levels. Okay, bye. I'm going to sit here and listen now.
Well, glad you came in and shared with us, Wade. Hope your back's doing better. What about you, Johnny B? What are you sitting at? You're sitting there in the grow room puffing on hash?
Yeah, I'm just hanging out in my room here. It's been down for a few months.
Oh.
And doing some sift, cleaning up.
Perfect. Buds on the, I got some buds here that I need to sift and make some rosin with. I got some chocolate, which is just really beautiful quality on that. I got a little bit of cookies that I'm Bovita packing, as you can see. And then I have still like 100 grams of Where Is My Bike, which I'm using your med booster packs there that you gave me. So getting it all ready for actually squishing. The chocolope's nice and dry. I'm going to sift that and maybe make some bubble out of that, but I'm going to squish the rest here in the next little bit. I got all sorts of good flavors. And
I did I'm gonna say I did a test with one of those humidity pads. I brought it down to like 33% for sifting. I don't know if that was too much because I had a lot of plant material in it.
Yeah, dry. You know what? I'll never forget Skunkman telling me years ago, it's not a misnomer to dry sift. It's not a misnomer to dry sift. And getting the heads to actually go from this big, perfect water balloon down to a shriveled up grape, they just seem to be more readily available to first extract gently, but also to clean as well, depending on what methods you're using to clean.
Well, I know for squishing, 62% seems to be the magic number. But I mean, for sifting, I'm always trying to figure out, I bring my room down to 42% when I'm doing the first bounce. And that seems to be, I like 42, 420, of course. So that seems to be my magic number. But I mean, Sam and some other people out there, I mean, thoughts on that humidity levels from when we are sifting. I mean, I tried even in the freezer, got too much plant matter. This was in the very beginning when you were teaching me and stuff like that. So it's going back to some old thoughts.
Did you get your things figured out there, Sam?
I think so. Do you hear me?
Oh, you sound perfect.
Okay, well then, I guess I got it fixed. I don't know what the problem was. I don't care.
Well, we can't see you anymore, but we can hear you to near perfection. So that's
well, that's because what I've done is I turned my mic off. I turned everything else off, and I'm facing the computer, and I felt uncomfortable, so I put a piece of tape over it.
You're pulling a Mark Zuckerberg.
But it works fine. I did have a question for. Did Mark leave the room? No. Mark.
No, I'm right here.
That's what I want. So when you hydrogenate a cannabinoid, if there's an acid and a neutral fraction, then you're creating 4 isomers, correct?
Say that again now.
Okay, so you hydrogenate an acid form of a cannabinoid or a neutral form or both of them together, whatever, but then 4 different isomers are created by that process, correct?
Okay, so yeah, so the reduction of the acid group happens in a different hydrogenation process with a different catalyst. But yes, I mean, if you're making a mixture and you have both the hydroxymethyl and the acid form, that would be four different compounds, because every time you do a hydrogenation, you're going to make a little bit of the methyl going up and you're going to make a little bit of the methyl going down. And because you already have established stereochemistry at multiple centers within that molecule, those compounds are different compounds and are resolvable, what are called diastereomers, that we could actually see different peaks on in the both the NMR and in the HPLC. Right now, when I hydrogenate crystalline pure delta 9 THCA, that it is just absolutely pristine, pure crystalline, very, very clean. This is from Chris at the Clear. When we hydrogenate that, we see just about a 1-to-1 mixture of each of the diastereomers of HHCA. So that's with the methyl going up and the methyl going down. And Marcus, I'm looking in the chat here. You had said something that Tony Neg asked about a delta 9 being a red color.
Delta 10. Delta 10.
Or delta 10, I'm sorry. Let me comment on the red color for a second. So a few people have identified this in distillate, and the red may or may not be to a trace amount of a flavonoid that's in there that's very highly prone to either being very yellow or very red. But I think that in some of the CBD stuff that I'm seeing, where I'm seeing sort of like a ruby red, or more like it's a less amber red, but more of like a fuchsia red, like almost like a ruby red is the best way that I would describe it. I believe that impurity is the the hydroxyquinone, which is a known compound. If you look in Mishulam's paper, just Google CBD chemical aspects, you'll see a reference to paper where he sees oxidation products of CBD forming these highly conjugated material called quinones, which are usually red in color. And in fact, I think the ruby red color is that hydroxyquinone that's part of the what's called the beam test. There's a beam test that's used to differentiate CBD from THC, where one of the components turns red, and I think the other component turns blue if it's THC, it turns red if it's CBD. That red color that you're making is that hydroxyquinone. So that may or may not be the color, Tony Neg, that you're referring to. I'm not sure what the color of Delta 10 is, but I can tell you, I just got a text from Zach Jordan last night on this. The material that he sent me was pretty clear, or let me just say it's off-white. So it looked pretty pure, whatever it is. And, we'll have an NMR of it hopefully pretty soon. And when we have the results, we'll share it here. But I think Delta 10 is definitely a culprit, a phantom peak in a lot of people's distillate these days. So hopefully,
Mark, you were mentioning Delta 8. Do you find Delta 8 in herbal cannabis, or is it strictly an artifact of lab work? Do you know?
No, just the Delta 8, I think, is formed on the processing of Delta 9. Yeah, so Delta 8 is favored by. So it did the MM2 calculations on the entire tricyclic structure minus the C5 tail. And anybody who knows anything about molecular modeling, it would have taken a much longer time to solve the structures because of the infinite number of different populations that C5 alkyl tail is. So we chopped off that alkyl tail and we modeled the Delta 8 versus Delta 9 thermodynamics. And so ground state calculations show that Delta 8 is favored by a little over a kcal. So if given the opportunity, that double bond will walk over from Delta 9 to Delta 8. And that can be favored by heat. It can be favored by acid, most particularly acid. So again, if you look at that, at that Mishulam paper where they talk about the cyclization of CBD to make THC, that it goes to Delta 9 when they use a non-protic Lewis acid like boron trifluoride, which again promotes a different type of carbonium ion-based mechanism to close the ring to make THC, and there Delta 9 is favored. However, if you use protic acid like sulfuric or more common acids, methane sulfonic and stuff like that, those are going to basically favor the generation of Delta 8 because Delta 8 is favored if given the opportunity to isomerize from Delta 9 to Delta 8.
Okay, so to round this up and be clear, this is not happening in a living plant.
This is not happening in a living plant.
Yeah, you're doing it in a lab, or it's
biological pH won't do this alone.
Yeah, this is happening on the processing. Yes, I don't believe Delta 8 is naturally occurring in the plant.
Yeah.
Delta 9 acid.
Yeah, CBN is not naturally occurring either, but it's an important cannabinoid.
Yeah, so Delta 9 acid is what occurs in the plant, and the two things that are unstable about it is the carboxylic acid, so we all know it's prone to thermal decarboxylation, but also the double bond is prone to isomerization from Delta 8. If given the opportunity, will isomerize to Delta 9. But, these are things that, yes, don't happen in the plant. They happen on human processing, right?
Mark, have you ever looked at hydrogenated CBD? Can you hydrogenate?
Yeah, we did. In fact, hydrogenated CBD, Kevin, had better efficacy in our mouse data with glioblastoma. And again, given the legal landscape, hydrogenated CBD is certainly a sort of direct to market,
Yeah, probably.
so something that's probably going to be a lot easier to deal with in terms of regulatory and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, all these compounds that have double bonds in them will all hydrogenate, and maybe the idea is to lightly hydrogenate, but then recombine those with other things, So it's just a chemical refinement step that can be applied along the way. And perhaps you're right. The ultimate thing is to take the cannabinoid out, hydrogenate it, re-add the terpenes, and basically function like that. Yeah.
There's a second double bond hanging off of CBD. Does that get hydrogenated as well?
Yeah. So if you go to the Mckernan paper, the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry from 2006, you'll find out that they actually did the hydrogenation of CBD to make both the bis hydrogenated material and the monohydrogenated material, which you can just get away by using something like Wilkinson's catalyst, which will selectively just hydrogenate one of the double bonds. That's a platinum-based catalyst that uses, ruthenium. I think, they could use a ruthenium, but I think they used a platinum-based catalyst. But there are ways to sort of chemoselectively hydrogenate one double bond or the other. So, Mckernan's group had looked at this back in 2006. They published the results in the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry. However, you'll notice that they did not hydrogenate CBDA, right? They hydrogenated CBD. So, our concept is to basically take what the plant is providing, which are the cannabinoid acids, and hydrogenate those, which ultimately will be used to deliver the hydrogenated cannabinoids. But the key is to basically have that intellectual property that's the bridge between what the plant makes and the hydrogenated actives, right?
I think Sam's question earlier was about that O-methyl group you were speaking about. Does that, when you do the hydrogenation, do you get an O-methyl group on the carboxylic acid automatically, or is that just separate to methylate that group?
The O-methyl group on the carb. Yeah, so we don't. So you mean like an ester, like an O-methyl ester?
That's what I thought you mentioned earlier, that you had a way of putting an O-methyl group.
Yeah, no, we have a way of basically taking the acid down to the hydroxymethyl. So we convert what was a carboxylic acid into a CH2OH, right? So it becomes a new benzylic alcohol that we could then decorate stuff on the hydroxyl group. And again, Kevin, what I was sort of making a connection to is who knows how much more that high area of the hydrophobic clef of the active site can we tolerate? Well, let's start loading it up with methyl, ethyl, isopropyl, butyl, blah, blah, blah. Just start putting all kinds of groups out there and see if we can intercalate farther into the active site of CB1 receptor. We just don't know how much more steric baggage that area of the receptor can accommodate, how promiscuous it is.
Got to fluorinate it, man. Everyone loves to fluorinate it.
Yeah, well, the problem with fluorination, I hear you, and fluorination is actually a really very intriguing opportunity. Problem with fluorine is that whenever you put fluorine beta to a hydrogen, you're setting yourself up for the elimination of HF. And HF, for those of us who watch, Breaking Bad, is what, they dissolve the bathtub with, okay? That's nasty shit, okay? Yeah, you don't want to be messing with HF. Fluorinated stuff, there was some talk about this, and I know that Mckernan's made some fluorinated derivatives. And fluorine is a very, very interesting molecule because it's very polar, but it's hydrophobic. It's very, very peculiar. And the issue with perfluorinated materials, things like Teflon and other things like that, is there are no natural metabolic processes to degrade the carbon fluorine bonds. So that makes these materials persistent in nature, meaning that they're going to be around forever. So geologically, a million years from now, we will be known as the Teflon era because it's all Teflon, Fukushima era, because that's all that's going to remain from our era in stone, right? Because all the fluorochemicals that we've released, and obviously Fukushima and any other nuclear catastrophe waiting to happen.
This makes me want to ask
We
a
like
question.
cannabis seeds too,
Uh,
though.
Something I've been dealing with in my life. I'm going to get personal for a second. I hurt my back earlier this year, had back surgery 8 weeks ago today. And I have realized that just because I can do things doesn't mean I always should. And I really wonder about in this conversation, for example, the idea of using fluorine to alter cannabinoid structure in something that humans might consume at some point. It feels very strongly to me like this is something we can do, but should we be doing it? And it feels to me like the chemical industry is doing a long-term ongoing experiment on the planet and all the organisms that are on it. And I want to go religious for a second. This is church after all. Nature can provide, I think, most of the things that we need from this planet. We're just getting greedy about how about all the things we can do. Again, coming back to, there's things that I can do with my back being hurt that my physical therapists and whatnot tell me, no, you should really just chill. It's time to be patient with your body. And I think in cannabis science, I want to ask those of you who are doing research on these kind of things, the things that we're discussing this morning. Like I said, I'm fascinated by the science of cannabis. I don't understand that much about the plant, but I've really been struck at the healing potential in it. I know so many folk who have seen benefit in their own lives from this plant. And most all of those people got a version of the plant pretty close to how it comes out of the ground. Usually dried. For quite a while, it's been extractions with butters or olive oil or ethanol. Did some period of time working with medicine makers who were using hexane, because the research that I had done suggested that if you made sure all the hexane was out, it was a really good way of preserving cannabinoids and terpenes profiles like you would find in the plant. And one of the beauties of this gathering that you created here, Marcus, is there's all different ways of looking at and working with this plant being expressed here. And the science of it is something that I really love, like I've said a couple of times already. But I have to come back to, again, just because we can, should we? I really, especially when you start talking about medicine, and at least part of Hash Church is, for me, how to work with this plant and concentrate it in ways that are beneficial, both for your headspace and the lovely vibe. Like it's been said here before, it's okay to feel good. It's all right to feel good. That's a beautiful healing aspect of this plant. But there's so many other things it can do for us. And Sam has really shown over the years that there's all kinds of different ways to get different cannabinoids from this plant. It's incredibly plastic. We don't really have to create new plastics or new chemical compounds that don't exist in nature as a result of our playing with the plant because we can. Again, there's that thing. Just because we can,
well,
I get nervous.
I think mostly that they're using these chlorinated or phenylated or whatever they're doing to it, cannabinoids. I think they're using them for research more than they're actually trying to make medicines for human beings. And if research if that allows you to understand the mechanism of control of the cannabinoids over receptor systems, et cetera, I think that's a very beneficial thing. And without science, we wouldn't know what THC is. We wouldn't. So, I mean, I'm absolutely in favor of science, but yeah, we don't want anything that's going to harm anybody. And if we can make it naturally from a plant, of course, that makes a little bit more common sense, and it's going to be cheaper too.
Yeah, and I weigh in there as well that I think some of this desire to make non-natural compounds really is rooted back in our intellectual properties. You can get monopolies if you change it, whereas if it's natural, it's very hard for you to get these patents on things, and so thus there's a desire for people to make Rimonavant and bring out a CV disaster, which everyone warned them about. You don't want to hit that thing and turn it off. You're going to depress people, and lo and behold, we get suicides. But that temptation, I think, was there because they could get IP on a molecule that was different. We're motivating society to mess with something that's been working for millennia and modify it with a very small amount of data on toxicity and on how this works in the general population. And we step in that trap, I think, all the time when we go to the road. Not that we shouldn't pursue it, to Sam's point. I do not view humankind as outside of nature. I view our minds and what we create as very similar to, the intelligence that bees have building beehives and beavers making dams. We also are sentient enough to question longevity, perhaps a bit more than these other organisms. And since we're gifted with that, perhaps we should honor it a little bit more.
Hey, I wanted to welcome Mike West to the room. How's it going, Mike? I don't know if you're froze up or if you're still there, but welcome. I guess he froze up. It's interesting to hear both sides of the story. I find it fascinating as well, the science, from Sam's perspective. If it's for research, it's kind of, it's obviously a beneficial thing, but at the same time, I see Wade's perspective as well. It's always interesting to see where you're coming from this, and that's why I always enjoy having Wade and Forrest on, because they're really coming from this perspective of helping very sick, children in particular. And so when you're helping sick children, your perspective is going to be very unique and very sort of focused on that concept of hey, we got to be really careful what we give these, delicate, susceptible children that are very, very, sensitive to anything that could be in the plant that maybe doesn't necessarily need to be there. At the same time, who's to say what incredible discoveries may occur in some of the work that guys like Dr. Mark are doing in regards to helping mankind and helping us with our health and helping unlock the endocannabinoid system and getting a deeper understanding on how it works and all of these complex compounds. It's extremely interesting. I can't believe that was an hour solid of intense science talk. Oh, there you are, Mike. You're back. I see you moving now. You shocked me how long your hair and beard are, because I just picture you as this clean-cut guy. And it's oh, shit, Mike's been in the cave building extract facilities for the last couple of years. Very cool, dude. Can't hear you, but oh, he's typing. I guess his mic's not working. Oh, he's got a bad connection. He's going to come right back. No problem. Make it back.
Yeah, so just to comment for a second, Marcus, on the patent and all that, patenting and things, is that the only way to really take these through, FDA sanctioned clinical trials is to really have a good, strong proprietary position on the other side of those trials. And albeit very historic, what GW is doing with Epidiolex, which is basically CBD, and Sativex, which is a 1-to-1 CBD THC for epilepsy and multiple sclerosis. On the other side of those clinical trials, which is going to teach the world what we already know, which is that cannabis in these formulations to a statistically significant portion of the population that has these diseases can be effective at controlling these symptoms, GW will have to rely on their everything but the active ingredient patent estate to enforce, their patent. I mean, will that be able to impact the CBD industry? I mean, it's the sort of 800-pound gorilla in the room, is that they are taking Epidiolex through Food and Drug Administration approved trial and spending a lot of money doing it. So the company that does that with our compound will actually own the clinical trial results, and then again really come up with formulated medicine the way that the pharmaceutical companies can accept it, which is by food and drug trials, phased, new drug application and the approval of a new drug active ingredient, a variety of different formulations. So I think that HHCA, and again, look about it as both a R&D tool to assess stereochemical promiscuity within the active site of CB1 receptor, but also a potential probe or therapeutic in and of itself that might have enhanced therapeutic potential for very, very sick patients.
Yeah, and my comments there on IP were not at all aimed at you, Mark. It's more just that's what our system investment, because there's such substantial cost getting things through the FDA. By the time you're done, you're bankrupt if you don't have a patent to protect what you've built. So I'm not here to blame the players. It's more the game.
That's interesting to cover both sides of the conversation either way. I like that we can do that here in Hash Church without getting into full-blown assaulting arguments. It's nice to have different perspectives.
Cannabis is the bridge.
Cannabis is the bridge. That being said, I definitely, for the first time, really got a better understanding in regards to what you're doing with the hydrogenation. I don't know if I just wasn't listening before, paying too much attention to moderating, but thank you for sharing that, Dr. Mark. That was...
no problem at all. No problem at all. It's, a lot of people ask me, all the time, about it, and people are concerned about when they hear about hydrogenated oils and they know that generates trans fats. And so right away, the knee-jerk reaction is that, oh my God, you're generating trans fats. It's like, no. Cooking oil is very different than cannabis extract, and you wouldn't dab cooking oil. And to kind of talk about what Wade was referring to with the olive oil extracts, yeah, olive oil is a great, wonderful hydrophobic vehicle for the delivery of cannabis oil into a variety of different product formulations. Unfortunately, like some extracts that we like to dab, I mean, once they're in olive oil, forget about it. You can't dab that now, right? Because you have a high molecular weight triglyceride oil, so it can be formulated into a variety of different product formulates other than something that you can dab. But I'll go back to, again, like having a variety, kind of like Marcus, the way you say, the quiver, right? The arrows in your quiver. And each one of these extraction methods, whether it's ice water or butane or liquid nitrogen, or, oh my gosh, I mean, there's so many different ways of removing trichomes and trichome medicine from the plant, that all of these just represent a different way of extracting, that you can have different products that have different terpene profiles or different modes of action. Or like you were saying, like with the olive oil, I mean, it's always great to, whenever you make rosin chips, or you don't know if you got leaving anything in your rosin chips, hell, just soak them in olive oil, soak them in a little coconut oil, make some medicated oil. Next time you fry up some bacon, don't just throw away that bacon fat. Use it to basically, medicate it. So, I mean, there's lots of different fat vehicles and ways that you can extract. And I try to, tend to stay away from isopropanol. That's one solvent I don't like, but everything else is open and game.
I have about 4 pounds of solventless, basically screened herb that I've pressed already that still has, you can see tiny little bit of.
Yeah. So what do you do
rosin
with
on this
those,
one.
Mark?
This will get plant fat extracted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you throw those in like a big tub or something like that. Throw a bunch of oil in there, or like what do you do with the process?
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Do a slow cook.
Yeah, I mean, even like a process like that, which doesn't even have to be very, high tech at all. It could be almost just like a Rick Simpson. I wouldn't say Rick Simpson.
Crock pot.
Yeah, exactly.
A big crock pot.
Yeah. You can do a low temperature extraction. You don't even need to really heat it up, as long as you know
it's super low.
Yeah, as long as you know you're clearing out everything. And why not grab all that stuff, right? Why would you throw that stuff away?
I mean, unless your ego is so big that you think you're so efficient in pressing. And for me, I feel like I'm getting the majority of what's there just based on the results. Like whereas my bike, I got 28% return. The highest I've seen it go is 30, so maybe there's 2% left. That's enough for me to go back and extract that out. I mean, also another thing with rosin, you could be very efficient in your extraction process, but you might be very inefficient on how you remove the actual screen bag from the squished paper. So a lot of people, and I see it all the time, they go to grab that bag and they rub it through the rosin, and the whole edge of the bag just grabs a chunk of rosin. And, in one squish, that's not a big deal. But if you're doing 50 to 100 squishes a day and each bag is 35 grams and you're leaving behind several percent, it ends up being substantial. And that's not even a large commercial, production. If you were doing like 500 to 1,000 a day, imagine how much resin that ends up being for someone that, even if you just did it as a philanthropy project and said, you know what, we always save the rest, we do a crock pot extraction and we give it away, you'd see that would make a big difference in a lot of people's lives, whether it was monetary or not.
Remember, Marcus, that 2,000 years ago, the Persians were using sesame oil to extract cannabis, more like a dry sip, the real farmer's hash.
Incredible. Sorry, my mic muted there for a second. Someone asked me what temperature I pressed 28% out at. It'll surprise a lot of you. It's 220 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of people will say that's too hot, but I will explain to you that the humidity level, the moisture content of the plant has to be high for that to really be productive. Around 60+%, like what John and I were talking about earlier. If you go down below that, then the resin actually gets affected by the heat. I don't know why it doesn't with the more moisture. It might be why we put the water in with a coconut oil extract. That water acts as a buffer and sort of keeps the heat from affecting the resin and blowing out the terpene profile. But I can assure you my rosin never tastes like burnt popcorn. And when I open it up for people to smell, particularly the bike, shout out to the maple butter boys, particularly the Where Is My Bike, it's constantly, every single person says the same thing. They're like, wow, it is so terpenoline rich. It just reeks like utter dank. And it's a beautiful thing.
What is it analyzed for, Mark, in terms of like cannabinoid content?
I'd have to get see that if Maple Butter Boys have done that. I personally haven't done that, but I don't know what the 30% breaks down into, but I would say that it's pretty high in THC and
THCA.
Yeah, THCA. Sorry, exactly. Talking to the chemist here, I better not.
No, I'm just curious. Again, it's like walking that fine line, like you said, the burnt popcorn taste. Like we first said, I believe right here on Hash Church, that it's like a steam distillation based process by which the water that's inside the plant material is responsible for basically pushing everything out. And so there's a delicate balance of being at just the right temperature, just the right the pressure, and also just having the right balance of oil, because I think, as you know, not all strains are good for squeezing. I'm still trying to figure that one out, man.
And Marcus, have you ever squeezed bone dry material and got high yields?
I have squished bone dry materials. I tend to get lower yields and have to go in like a second and third time. I've also done fat plant extractions where I've seen higher results from bone dry material. But what I really see in bone dry material is just a deeply affected resin. When I go to collect it at the end, it's just like popping and shattery. It's like almost impossible to pick up on my dabber. Whereas when I when I press anything or squish anything at, with 60% moisture content, it usually comes out. It might cake out in butter, but it usually comes out in a way that I can pick it up very easily.
It would be interesting to measure to see if the more poppy ones, as you're calling them, are higher in THC rather than THCA.
Well, they're definitely lower in terps. That I can say from my own bioassay.
I've squished at 69%, and all I've got from that is steam, and it's actually burned me. So that's where I've gone different levels. But, I found that, like you say, the 62% works the best. But at the same time, I'm curious. I've squished really dry material at 33%, all the same material, all the way up to 68%. And if I look back in that video, I think it was really hard to come off the parchment at the lower levels. But I'll have to double check that. I'm kind of curious now that you talked about that, because I did all the different humidity levels with the same cannabis. Like I put everything in jars and dried it all out, and then I squished everything. And yeah, I believe it was hard to come off the parchment when it was dried material. Just thinking in my brain, I really appreciate you pointing that out. I kind of want to think about that.
I just prefer it less too. I don't enjoy it as much when the material's too dry. I got some cookies yesterday that I'm really excited to squish, but I had to Bovita pack this up. It was much drier than I like, and I've had it in here for about 24 hours or so now, and I'll probably wait another 15 to 16 hours before I squish this particular bag.
Nice.
And what would happen if you mix buds? So you'd put in one dry bud, one damper bud, one dry bud, one damper bud, and then squish them together with that.
I'll have to do the experiment. I've never tried that, Sam.
I like that. Me either.
I'm really hyped on this process having moisture in my bud. It just seems like it makes the most sense. It really flows, when you lose your moisture, you lose that flow.
You're correct. If that's the way you feel, I bet you you're correct.
Yeah, it's just based on how I feel exactly. It could be my ego making a mistake based on things that aren't accurate, or it could be my bioassay based on I just want the tastiest, nicest,
It's the bio. It's the tastiest. It's the nicest. And it gives us our best yield, and it's easier to clean off the parchment for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely going to squish a half pound when I'm done church here. It's with this new machine I got, the Pure Pressure Long Peaks. It's just, I can't believe how easy. Yeah, just the recipes. We've come a long way. Let me tell you guys something. We've come a long way since episode 25 of talking about rosin, the rosin episode. Sorry, let me just get that on mute there, buddy. The rosin episode where we were squishing with hair straighteners and talking about, wouldn't it be cool if we had a machine? Wouldn't that be that's a historic episode when I look back at it, because it was like all the things we spoke about in there brought us, D-Nail right away coming out with the t-shirt press, the modified t-shirt press with dual heated plates, to a company like Sasquatch coming out. These guys have welding capabilities. They were herb, heady herb people, busting out this super solid, incredible press, to coming to the Pure Pressure guys, which were engineers, and they were coming at it from an engineering standpoint. So they're creating LED screens, touch screen with recipes, with all the all of your variables included, from what you're squishing, flower, kefir, bubble, the size of the microns bag, the length and the width of the bag for fitting on the plates, the moisture content, the heat of each plate, the pressure that you're using through each stage, the emergency stop button and the dual buttons for engaging, and the toggle switch for increasing the PSI pressure via incremental PSIs, whether you want 5 or 10 or 20 or 100. And that's really important for when you're, for those of you that want to know, quick little rosin lesson here. When you're squishing flour, I use about 140 PSI maximum. The flour is much softer and the bags don't blow out. I can use my plates sped up a lot more so they close pretty fast, and I can engage my pressure from 20 PSI up to 140 PSI very, very quickly, almost instantly. This would be counterintuitive and the opposite of how you would squish hash, particularly hard, solid, quality bubble or dry sift that's been cleaned up to a 4 or a 5 star. And what we want is we want the plates to come down much smaller, and we want to use the pressure at a much more incremental stages rather than blasting it out. And I would never go 140 PSI, which is about 15,000 pounds of pressure. I would never go 140 PSI when I'm squishing hash. I would do a much lower process. We're squishing the glands now, not trying to get the glands off of the bud. We're milking the glands. So you want to come down really slow, do a pre-press, let the heat sit on that hash so it melts and liquefies, and then finally increment, to maybe upwards of 80 or 70 PSI to get your yields and to get a really nice quality bubble rosin.
I remember in the days we thought that we had heart attacks because we're all pressing. D4, all of us, remember the?
Oh yeah, I hurt myself.
Oh man, we were pressing kinks for a while.
Right?
What's that, Mark?
Rosin arm, like tennis elbow.
No,
right?
I'm telling you, I invited D420K over, and we were like, hey, let's press up, an ounce. We were like, well, let's press up an ounce of rosin with our hair straighteners, and we sat there and we were pressing and like an hour went by, and I was like, okay, we got 14 grams of rosin. That's enough. We're done. I can do 14 grams of rosin in a single press now. Like just make 14 grams of rosin. Like no problem. If I put 30 or 40 grams of high grade hash in there, I could make 20 to 25 plus grams of rosin in a single squish. Even the Where's My Bike, I get close to 10 grams of rosin in under, in like 2 minutes. I have from just flour. Just boom, I just made 10 grams of rosin. So that's pretty good for at home.
I remember when in the beginning you would look at a bag of flour and you would like, let's wash it. That's all you used to do is wash it. Like, I don't want that. Now you're squishing everything. I love it.
Well, I'm squishing, helping a friend out who wants me to squish a little bit for him.
Learning so much about all the different strains and everything like that, and finding out which squish better, humidity levels, all these different. Yeah, it's really, I love it because I get to watch it all the time.
Well, and that's why the Pure Pressure is such a great press, because you're monitoring all of those things. You're literally putting all of that information, all that data goes into your recipe with the name of the cultivar that you used. You could do up to 30 different ones, and it's nice to be able to go back and understand what your yields were based on all of those variables, because I can promise you if you change those variables, your yields will change and the quality of your rosin will change. Obviously the variables that are the heat of the plates, which is actually perfect timing for D420K to come into the room. Because dude, I'll never like, dude, I laughed so fucking hard at that time, and I'm sorry that I laughed because I know it was a pisser. But when you asked me what the temperature for the rosin plates were, and I was like, oh dude, like 220 or whatever, between 180 and 220, and I forgot to say Fahrenheit. And we do live in Canada, and we use Celsius, so I was just fucking, I don't know if I was stoned that day or whatever, but D went and did it at like 220 Celsius, and I've never seen rosin spit. He's like, dude, I got it all over my shoes and my forehead. Like, it was fucking.
It was on my fucking camera holder. I've got the camera up holding it, and it's all over the bottom of my hand, and it's just spitting out like it's mad.
Dude, it was unbelievable. That you know what though? Another great experiment. Like, it's like a sacrifice for sure, but what an experiment, dude. That shit was like, it was spitting out of his press.
And there was guys making comments going, trying to be nice, not going, hey, stupid, it's too fucking hot. They're like, I think it's a little set too high there, D, and all this sort of stuff. People being nice about it, but fuck, really, they should have just said, what the fuck are you doing, dummy? Anyways, bong rip, mother lovers. Let's get this fucking show on the road.
Yeah, did you listen to the first hour?
Yeah, I did. There was a lot of Delta 9 and Delta 8s and all kinds.
You know what? I'm not going to lie. At one point in time, it didn't even sound English.
I was
just
lost.
getting stoned thinking about it, going, holy fuck, I better get really high to catch up on this stuff.
You know what, though? I will say something. Sam warned me about the ICRS recently. He said, listen, it's very dry. It's researchers, it's a lot. Sometimes it goes over my head. And I was like, damn, like if it goes over Sam's head,
it's completely changed. The first one I attended 25 years ago, it was all of the funding came from the NIDA, which is National Institute for Drug Abuse. It's not that they're biased, but their name says it all.
It's not that they're biased, but they're biased.
And it was also funded by the piss test companies. So, the drug testing companies were funding research too, but that was who funded everything. If you wanted to find something positive about cannabis, nobody would fund it, period.
Well, and to finish my thought, that's why I think I'm actually going to be quite excited and stoked to be at the ICRS, because although I didn't understand everything Dr. Mark was saying this morning on the same level as Kevin seemed to understand it, I definitely felt like it was intriguing and interesting, and I wanted to hear more about it. So I'm looking forward to the ICRS.
What do you need to know, Mark? What do you need to know, man? What if you didn't understand it? Chances are a bunch of people didn't understand.
Well, no, it's not that I didn't understand it. I understood the basis of what you were talking about. I just don't know all the terms. I don't know all the chemicals. I don't know all the interactions on the same level that you may take for granted. So I found it very interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, or just reach out in chat or reach out to me on the YouTube chat. I've tried to break it down to make it as simple as
well, and you did, don't get me wrong, but the terminologies are nonetheless the terminologies that are required to use when discussing chemistry. And so some of that was just went a little deep. Welcome back, Mike West.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you. Do you have any thoughts to share on our interesting discussion this morning?
I did. No, I love it, Mark. Something I've seen a lot of, because now that there's a lot of farms and labs that are doing processing, when they do their distillation, they're doing fractional distillation of cannabinoids using a broad spectrum of different types of equipment. Some of them obviously are doing it at hotter or lower temperatures, ranging from, I guess, 150s up to the 200s under vacuum centigrade. And I definitely do see, I think there was a comment earlier, seeing the oxidization of some of those cannabinoids and pigments. I don't know, Mark, I'd assume I'm seeing more degradation in the short paths than in the rolled films that we're doing, because of the shorter residence time at those temperatures.
Yeah. You know, a lot of it has to do with, you got to remember when you put these compounds. I'm sorry, my wife's running her hair dryer in the other room. Is that obnoxious? Should I shut the door? I'll shut the door. Hold on a second.
It's not so bad, Mark. I have my headphones on and it's really very light.
Okay. So I think the key is you got to remember when you heat up your distillation pot and you're doing these high temperature vacuum distillations to make distillate, that you want to put as clean a precursor into that pot as you possibly can. And when I say clean, free of things that are going to thermally degrade to make noxious flavors that are going to not only taint your distillate, but potentially could be hazardous to your health. You know, a lot of these pesticides and a lot of other residues that could potentially be in a distillate pot, you want to make sure that they're not in there to begin with. So full winterization till where you don't see any precipitation in an ethanol concentrate frozen down to -40, because any fat or lipids or waxes that remain in your distillate precursor, when you go to heat it up, are going to degrade. And when they degrade into noxious smelling compounds. And you may recognize the burnt, rubber sort of flavor in some distillate that sometimes, again, is a hallmark of distillate that's made from precursor that wasn't completely fully winterized. And so the winterization, again, followed by a lot of people are doing a variety of different methods or scrubs to sort of clean up their distillate precursor to remove traces of unwanted component. But you want to try to make what you put under thermal load in your distillation pot as clean as it possibly can, because a lot of those compounds end up degrading thermally, and again they'll co-distill with the cannabinoids, and you'll get phantom peaks in your GC. People
Hey,
are using
Mark,
things like
could
molecular sieves, clays, and carbons, again, to clean up the distillate precursor before it gets heated up. But go ahead, Mike.
could the acids used in those scrubs be causing unwanted isomerization during the later distillations?
Yeah, it could really be.
You're muted, Mark. Somehow you muted yourself.
I'm sorry. I muted myself. Can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me now? Okay. Yeah. So the preponderance of Delta 8 in a lot of those products leads me to believe that, yeah, there's a lot of acidic scrubs that basically are converting Delta 9 over to Delta 8 in that process. So, yeah, I mean, I can't comment particularly on a SOP or a process to do that because we're still working it out ourselves. But I can tell you that certain things like zeolite clays and other acidic clays are certainly used as
Did he freeze up?
Bong rip.
I'm pretty sure he froze up.
Bong rip.
Yeah, so obviously what Mark was commenting on, what we're seeing primarily when you're dealing with the isolation of individual cannabinoids, it's primarily been done using physics, doing precipitation at cold temperatures with solvents, primarily done with ethanol. But most C1 through C5 alcohols can be used. And then now, I guess over the last 3 or 5 years, the cannabis industry has really taken off doing fractional distillation to create those distillates. And distillates are fairly popular within the vape pen industry. But one of the things that we're really seeing is that it's a wonderful way to remove all the heavy and light molecular weight stuff, but obviously some of those you want to retain, the terpenes being a broad class of uh, essential oils that many research papers have shown to be beneficial.
So Mike, do you, because I've always noticed this in the distillate world, and I haven't got too deep into the world of the distillates, but I have friends that have like VTA units and whatnot. They're running through short path molecular distillation, and it's all under a vacuum, so they're decarboxylating prior to the putting it through the unit, and the terpenes that they had sort of fractioned off were possibly the worst smelling compounds I've ever smelt in my life. Like they were just so horrific and bad. I'm like, is the distillate world not figuring out to make the terpenes, extract their terpenes first and then run the material for distillate?
That's exactly it. There's kind of a lot of what you're smelling in that distillate is thermally degraded free fatty acids and essential oils that, as you're exposing those oils to those thermal temperatures in the presence of oxygen, you're cleaving off carbons. And those are not only, when you're breaking, thermally decomposing, free fatty acids, phospholipids, etc., within the distillation apparatus, it creates undesirables. And those artifacts that are created by that, obviously you want to remove that before it goes through that distillation. So now, early on, before everyone was doing distillation, everyone was just winterizing and putting winterized oil in vape pens. You could do that cold temperature winterization and retain some of the terpenes. But now that you have the thermal treatments, you have to separate your terpenes before doing that isolation, and then ideally recombining the native terpenes back in, or introducing engineered terpene ratios. But it's really taken off in, the fractional distillation and isolation has really taken off in the CBD hemp realm, because a 0.3% flower, once you start extracting it, may have more than 0.3% of the other cannabinoids. So then you have to take it to that, essentially fractionally distillate sector to essentially remove all the cannabinoids that can prevent hemp companies from distributing the hemp oils. So a lot of them have to essentially do that. And even in these bigger states, there's a bunch of people that obviously harvests are going to be based on the weather of the year. You're going to have trends where, forest fires cause crop loss, and farmers don't want to lose that crop loss, so they want to try and recover whatever cannabinoids are there, even though the terpenes may not be that great. So they can still recoup some of their loss selling it into the edible market or top. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's welcome back, Mark.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just, again, finishing up on the point of make your distillate precursor as clean as it can possibly be, because a lot of the things in there degrade to give off flavors and stinky shit.
Hey, Mark, have you ever seen e-cigarettes doing any looked at that? I know that you can see it with nicotine, right?
Yeah, well, my gosh, don't get me started on nicotine. Holy shit. I mean, nicotine, 60 milligrams is toxic to the average sized adult. Do you believe that? Like a 60 milligram dose, it seems like it's hardly a lot at all, because when you think about THC and 60 milligrams of nicotine is enough, I think, by oral ingestion based on known toxicity data to kill a human.
Yeah, well, don't they put horses down with pure nicotine shots?
Do they really? Oh my God, that would be cool.
That's what I heard. Yeah, there were these big syringes. It's just like, boom, that thing's dead before the plunger reaches like the halfway point or whatever.
Oh, Lord. Even though it's the after.
Nicotine's no joke.
I know, it's really toxic. So imagine, I don't know, like how many milligrams are in a cigarette, compared to how many milligrams of like THC are in like a joint, like how that compares with one another. But again, if you were to think that THC had the toxicity of nicotine, first of all, we'd probably all be dead by now, as much cannabis that we all smoke. But I mean, if THC was as deadly as nicotine, oh my gosh. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy. Nicotine's set up to do all kinds of toxic chemistry in your body. It's just.
I always told people that wanted to quit smoking, I just said, eat a pack of cigarettes. I swear you'll never smoke another one again.
It's true.
Oh, but you will be sick.
Especially after you vomit it all up, right? Oh my gosh.
God damn. Get one stuck in your nose cavity.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, especially when you see people who smoke cigarettes in and around cannabis production operations. You could smell cigarettes and cigarette breath on people, and people who smoke cigarettes smell like cigarettes. And it's like, you got to think that, again, the plants could somehow sense that, can't they?
I sure always was bothered when people would smoke cigarettes either in the grow room or outside and then go in the grow room. I was always kind of like,
outside the grow room, right? Like right at that envelope of that first breath of fresh air. Supposed to be fresh air outside the grow. No, curtain of nicotine and tobacco from all your
standing
smoking.
under the intake fan.
No, you want to tell these people, oh my God, you guys, what up, right?
In theory, you can transmit tobacco viruses to cannabis.
Right.
Really?
Now, nobody's sure if you have to handle living plants, recent dead plants, or old cigarettes, but it has been shown to be transmitted. But how easily, I'm not so sure.
One more no-no. I wonder how many people cause their own suffering in the grow room by having like very poorly taken care of house plants or plants around their property that are just suffering with bugs and mildews and then just not putting it together. It's like, dude, you got like a plant in your living room full of spider mites. I think it might be the culprit.
I think a lot of the cannabis viruses also have little or no symptoms. So, there might be, 10 or 20 viruses that have been found in cannabis, but most of them are symptom free. There's only 2 or 3 that are really, really dangerous.
Right. And by symptom 3, do you obviously think that it would probably still affect the plant's ability to express itself to its maximum potential?
Maybe a tiny bit, yeah. Maybe you could tell if you were used to the variety and you had grown it by the hectare for a decade or 2, and then it had this problem, and you noticed a slight reduction or something. But yeah, I mean, by symptom free, it really means that it's not causing economic damage.
Well, I had invited Ian Davidson in today. He was unable to come from Segra International Tissue Culture Company. He's a large-scale grower down in California that grows a substantial amount of cannabis. And I was really hoping he was going to be able to come today, but maybe next week we'll get into tissue culture and talk about the renewed vigor that can occur when you can clean up a plant of all of the fungi, microbials, and pathogens that have impregnated themselves into that plant over the course of 5 or 10 or 20 years of, cloning it in the humidity domes, passing it on, growing it in a garage to a bedroom to a whatever. Definitely a super interesting conversation that I'll look forward to having.
It's insects that are spreading most of the problems with viruses with plants. They are the vectors, the insect pests.
They're the vectors, hey?
Well, people, right?
Talking with some people about the seed companies and how all the new tissue cultures and how it's more thriving now. We're not going from seed, everything's turning into tissue cultures because, of course, less disease, less problems.
Yeah, well, not too many people doing it just yet to making it available to most people. So I think most people are still doing clones and seeds, but you could definitely see it as when you look at all the clonally produced plants on the planet, that it's been something they've all come to the conclusion that this will help avoid a lot of problems.
Cannabis is the wine industry. All new grape plants are certified virus-free, clonally produced.
I think we need a bond.
So there's been some interesting research coming out of California that was looking essentially as cannabis getting affected by some of the forest fires. One of the competitions I was talking to one of the organizers about was actually being able to trend where people were failing for microbial based on where upwind the forest fires were. I think they were discussing whether or not the forest fires were inadvertently spreading molds and mildews from the old growth forests through the hills into the groves.
Wow. So, traveling on the smoke, traveling in the air, being blown.
Well, the spores traveling on the ash and the ash traveling on the wind. So
Damn. I guess even when a forest fire is occurring, you got to think that all the insects are like buggering off out of there. So there's probably like this massed migration of insects traveling away from the heat of the smoke in the air. And like Sam said, they're also going to be carrying pests.
Well, and just after a forest fire, basically the forest is ready to regenerate. So basically germination and everything is upregulated in such a way that everything sort of regenerates and takes hold. So there's actually compounds that are found in the soot that are actually promoters to seed germination. So there's a series of compounds called butanolides, which are naturally occurring compounds that actually they find in the forest after forest fires that are basically responsible for, again, the upregulation of now the forestation of what's been recently deforested in a fire.
Yeah, it's interesting in BC. It could be elsewhere as well, but we have this plant called fireweed, and it's the first to sort of, get into the soil after a forest fire. It's one of the first that shows up like every time.
Right.
It's the colonizer.
We had a lot of fires in BC the last few years, and in northern BC here especially as well. And last year was a huge problem for a lot of growers in the north, powder mildews and all those types of things, like the shitty parts of the forest fires that come. Like there wasn't there a theory that everybody was the government was putting this out to fuck all your plants up and all that sort of shit. And in the old days, was there a theory like that going around? Does anybody remember? That it was
100%. Yeah, man-made. Yeah.
And so, but with the outbreaks that we had last summer and everything, like, literally had to just take whole rooms, empty them, take everything out of the rooms, new plastic, new poly, new paint. Every cord, every fan blade, everything needed to be sanitized. Every single part of the room, inside, out, underneath, on top, had to be cleaned thoroughly before we could get rid of it. And it was horrible. And there was a lot of fires up here. The smoke was even getting in. There was smoke all around us, for fuck's sakes. It was harsh.
It was here in Abbotsford too, all the way through here. Remember
all the way
that?
down through all of it. It was heavy smoke all through the region. So let's hope we don't get too many fires this year.
Yeah, it's good to keep smoke away from your curing cannabis plants. I've definitely seen more than a few hippie jars of cannabis passed over to my nose and been like, were you curing this near your wood stove? Like, were you using a wood stove while curing this? And the herb will just smell like blanketed with that smoky sort of
cedar type flavor.
People were using those sulfur burners in their veg rooms or anywhere in the place, and then they're making oil out of their product in the bud room. When the fuck were we using the sulfur burner? He's like, yeah, but I only had it going on in my veg room. I'm like, yeah, but I can smell it on this instantly. That's all I smell. I don't smell the quality. I smell a match.
Yeah, bubble bags turned me on to the powdery mildew that people were spraying Defender and other of these sulfur burners on. I had no idea about it until I started making bubble. And the first time I made bubble with some Defender sprayed material, it smelled like a pack of matches being lit. If you just lit the edge of the hash, it was super melty and beautiful. And I'll never forget, I lived 2 doors down. It was like 20 years ago. I hucked that piece of hash, like almost an ounce of it, off my deck into the forest because it was that ruined. There was no saving this product.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's still there. You should go look for it.
It's definitely not. It was 20 years ago, but and I can make more now.
I'll go take it up.
I'll see Johnny B outside my house with a shovel in the next couple of days.
In the neighbor's yard.
You think he's joking? What's that,
I'm
Mike?
over.
What's that, Mike?
Mushroom patch in that woods.
Yeah, we have great mushroom patches in our woods. We've got the cyanescens growing quite prolifically here and around my little village They're wood chip. From here to like almost to the bridge to Vancouver, which is most of West Vancouver, all the boulevards, everything is wood chip. And the wood chips, of course, are cyanescent friendly. So we get some just wonderful mushrooms. It's nice to be able to pick psychedelic mushrooms. I'm not going to lie. It's still something I quite enjoy doing. Some mushies.
Also enjoy
It's a great experience.
all kinds of mushrooms. I think chanterelle might be one of my favorites.
What's that, Sam?
I really enjoy picking chanterelle mushrooms.
Oh, chanterelles. Yeah, I have a friend locally here who picks all the edible mushrooms, quite a few of them, from morels to chanterelles and maybe another. He's a forager. He goes into he finds all the little herbs and berries and stuff that you can eat. I'll have to have him on Hash Church one day. He actually drew that Bubbleman picture there. That's pointillism, 110 hours. Bubbleman sitting on the moon trichome. It's all dots. There's not a single line in this particular picture. So Sean Michaels, I'll have to get him on Hash Church one day and we'll talk about foraging food in the forest. There's a lot of food out there.
The genomes, a few of those were released. I'm wondering if anyone is having issues identifying them in the field, and would a PCR assay help them? Or are you guys pretty good at identifying cubensis from others?
I mean, I'm pretty good at it. I learned from Paul Stamets. He's got a wonderful book out there called Psilocybin Mushrooms Around the World. And there's definitely, ways to learn. He's got like a trio of methods that, there's the thin layer that's clear that sits on top of the psilocybin mushroom that you can kind of peel off. And then there's obviously the bluing spores. Putting them on a piece of white paper. That one to me is like if you've got a good eyesight and you can see the color spectrum well. The poisonous ones like gallerinas, which are I think some of the most deadly ones.
Very closely related. Yeah.
They have a rusty brown spore, whereas the psilocybin has a very like purple-esque spore. And when you have them side by side, they're very, very easy to distinguish the difference in the two of them. And then, of course, the bruising on the psilocybin. The gallerina doesn't bruise at all, whereas the psilocybins will most assuredly, unless you pick them and put them right into your mouth, if you're picking them to collect them to dry them, they'll have blued, wherever you pick them from, wherever you touch them from, regardless even of the low psilocybin content ones like Stunsies. They still do it, and the higher psilocybin content ones like azarescins and cyanescins, these ones blew greatly. It's
and
quite.
I don't know of any other variety of mushroom that looks anything like psilocybin that blues.
Yeah.
No.
Boleta's blue.
Kevin, if you had a genetic test for the psilocin synthase, the precursor synthase, because then people who are in the field can do tests to see if they're potentially new or novel ones that are on danger.
Yeah, so you can probably do actually in the field RNA tests on that to actually look at RNA levels of that gene, because there could be a variance that mushroom to mushroom, and so some are really potent and some aren't, and so it's easy. The genetic ones are really easy. You could actually target that gene and look for it. But I think you'd probably want to go after the RNA just so you could see if it's more information in terms of not only is it cubensis, but how much is it making. It wouldn't be as good as measuring the compound, but it's a little bit harder to bring the analytical equipment into the field to test for this stuff. So the RNA would hopefully be a proxy to how much it's we're into yeast or piscia really soon, because they've mapped it all out now, and so they could theoretically brew this, and that'd be really wild, I think, because it's probably a very friendly pathway to like a guy. I bet the codon structure is the same. I bet it would port really easily. There you go. Your next beer is going to be a boomer.
Explain the difference between RNA to DNA to these people who don't know it.
So DNA you have to imagine DNA is like your hard drive. So all your programs are on there. But if you're happening to be running one of the programs excessively, you might see it in your task manager. It's like taking up all your CPU. RNA is which programs on the genome are actually getting expressed or getting run. And so when you measure RNA loads, you get a little bit more information about, okay, how actively expressed is this gene? Is it completely making probably any compound, or are the RNA levels through the roof? In which case, it may be in fact making it may be much higher percent expressed compound. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That definitely
The challenge
is a good
with
metaphor.
RNA is, yeah, it's a little it's designed to be ephemeral. It's designed to break down quickly because you want these programs to get run and then the molecule to get eaten up pretty quickly. And so it doesn't last very long tissue and bring it to the lab. Look at RNA. They're going to be asking a lot of questions about how'd you store it? Did you put it on dry ice, and how cold was it? Because the RNA is a ticking time bomb, and we want to make sure we're reading something as close to you know, the question that you're trying to add. You know, was shipped in FedEx and heated up to 50 degrees on a loading dock. That'll probably destroy all the RNA, or at least degrade it some bit. So it is important, if you want to do RNA stuff, to have tools that can go to you, because you're there and not have any of those questions.
Very interesting for certain. I think we lost Johnny B. He's off for the day. And I think we might have lost Indra too. He said he was off to the Santa Rosa High Times Cannabis Cup. I literally thought when he texted me that, I was like, wow, they're still throwing cannabis cups. It's like, damn. A lot of focus and time and energy that people put into cannabis cups to sort of build that brand, to build that name. It's always apparently for the patients. I bet you High Times probably hire some patients to do judging, though. I think that would probably be a good thing. I hope that they do. If they don't, some of these cups, if it's all for the patients, might as well get them to be the judges. Then at least in the least, they get access to the medicine after it's been tested and proven clean, I suppose. I had invited Alec from SC Labs in today, but he was also busy. Hopefully we'll get him in next week to share in the conversation with us. He's always good for some good convo. Those guys at SC Labs, they're doing some good things down in California.
Yeah, I think they do most of the testing for the cup. They do
Yeah.
a lot of a huge bunch of testing done in a very short period of time that a lot of people's livelihoods are connected to the results of.
Well, because they're choosing to, right? They're choosing to make that their platform to create their livelihood, whereas surely you could create a livelihood without the High Times Cannabis Cup. It's
Sure.
got to be able to be possible, is all I'm saying. It's a choice.
Well, part of it is just the pride of, competition. And
I think ego's a big part of it for sure, but I
Yeah.
think it's definitely connected to monetary gain as well. Not that I'm judging those two things. We all have egos and we all want to make money. I'm just, I've never been into it myself. I never been really into it.
The cool thing, Mark, and you know this because we know the same people. I mean, people like Cuban and Jibs are the nicest people in the world, and you could totally approach them at these
Yeah.
events.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to be well known or well respected, or you could just be some kid who's really just watched some YouTube videos or just heard about these people, and now you can totally like walk up and shake their hand and
Yep.
say, wow,
I always like that about the cup. I went since '95, and although I very rarely, like, the only part of it that left a bad taste in my mouth was like the competition part of it. It was always seemed so cheesy, and it was just like, compared to the actual cup, which was like, this is an awesome area for people to come and meet. This was also way before the internet, where you could just kind of get in touch with any of these people now if you wanted to, just via Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube in the comment section. But this was before all that, where you literally had to fly to Amsterdam because that was the only place it was happening. And that's where everyone it was a magical time, the mid 90s to the late 90s in Amsterdam. And I'm sure prior to that, I'm sure Sam has some unique stories as he saw it all unfolding and happening there, as he was one of the huge catalysts and sparks in making it happen. I don't think it's a coincidence, Sam. But you moved to Amsterdam?
No, and I did win the first High Times Cannabis Cup. And
I remember.
It was mine and Rob's idea, which we shared with Steve Haggard. They created the first High Times Cannabis Cup. But, you know, a lot of people had a lot of, you know, complaints about the cup. But the bottom line is, I think it did help cannabis in many different ways, even if, you know, they were just the Playboy centerfold equivalent of, I mean, High Times magazine was, you know, pot for porn, you know, but I still, all in all, really enjoyed myself at those things because I met so many interesting people who really loved cannabis. I mean, that's what the most interesting thing was for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's where I met you.
I agree. And again, I think it goes back to what I was saying about just being able to approach someone that you may only know from watching their internet video. And you're like, wow, that's Cuban grower over there. He looks just the same like he does on his thing. I can just walk right up and say, hi. Yeah. So those types of interactions. And yeah, I met a bunch of folks. Last time I was really surprised at the Emerald Cup at the amount of product that actually is transacted at that one. That's interesting because it seems like a lot of growers from the Northern California area actually, you know, barter trades with whatever, you know, there's just huge amounts, huge sacks of weed being, you know, taken back and forth all over the place. I know one of the issues with the cup has perennially been, where do people consume? Where are the safe consumption areas and where can people consume? Because you have to have a special bracelet to get in there, and the municipality, wherever you're having it, whether it's in San Bernardino or Santa Rosa, which always seems to be a really cool venue for it at the county fairgrounds there. They seem to really have it down. I've been to several cups there, but tell you the truth, like you said, I think the real differentiator is not necessarily the event itself. It's the people that show up and the interaction that you have with the people that go. That's what it's all about. So it's for the people, by the people, weed the people.
Absolutely. I would love to check out the Emerald Cup. It seems like a pretty good event. Lots of good folks. I just, one of these days I'll get off my ass.
What's your status on being able to come down south here?
I could probably do it. I could probably get my waiver now. I'm all pardoned. My record is pardoned in Canada. I've got a whole folder full of my waivers, and not to draw the conversation into politics, but from someone who paid very little attention to politics, it just seemed like it was safer under the last regime to travel down to the US than it potentially is today. Now, especially with now I guess Trudeau's fired back with some tariffs on US products since Trump did it to us for, I think, our steel.
So are bubble bags under tariff now, or like what's going on here?
What's that?
Are bubble bags under tariff?
Yeah, they cost $900 a set now. And I get 200. So
yeah, it's $69.95 at Walmart, I think.
I mean, hey, I'm paying $2 a liter for gas right now, so
yeah,
it's the world is a crazy place right now. So
we pay five euros
per what? Per liter?
Or maybe it's only 370 or something, but it's crazy more expensive than what you pay.
Well, I believe that because I remember being in Paris in the late 80s, in like 89, and thinking, wow, gas was like, I think it was between $1 and $2 a liter. Like, it was insane. It cost my friend's dad so much money to fill up his Mercedes. It was just like, from my perspective, because back in the 80s here, gas was just obviously a lot cheaper. A full tank of gas certainly wasn't like $90 to $100, whereas now it's more like $200. It's kind of crazy. Is this what getting old is all about? So we can complain, I remember when the bus cost a nickel.
I remember when they used to pay you to get on the bus.
Yeah, you were probably on
That
large
was called jail.
Yeah, that was called jail. Exactly. That's the punchline. I was gonna
feel so much pain all the time, constantly. You know, all the numb spots on your body from all the different breaks and scrapes.
Wow, dude, you broke like every bone in your body.
Oh yeah, I know, but that's for me. I'll be 48 this year, and the things that I can't believe that I'm sore where I am still.
Well, dude, didn't you like dislocate both your legs when you crashed your motorcycle?
Both legs, both shoulders, broken neck on that one, and broken wrist.
You must have been like a floppy doll just laying there unable to move.
I actually tried to sit up because it knocked the wind out of me too. And a buddy was behind me in his truck, and he got out and he just kept me down. He just, no, sit down. I was trying to get up, but because the wind was knocked out of me when I was boxing in my young days. And when I got the wind knocked out of me, my boxing coach would take my arms and go up and down, and it would manually exercise your lungs to get your air in there quicker. And what I did is I went to lift my arms to start doing the movement to get my lungs moving, and my arms were it just screamed. Everything screamed in my shoulders. I wasn't able to do that part. It hurt.
Yeah, that's some Evel Knievel shit.
Well, you know, I was doing so much painkillers and all that back then that it was literally the painkillers didn't do nothing. To get up into a sitting position into my bed on the side of it was the most excruciating thing I could ever do. And then I would just basically sniff a nice little line of fucking heroin because that would knock me out for the day. And I did that for about a week. Fucked myself up pretty good too. It was heavy. That was a long time ago. I don't do that anymore. Get rid of the pain. Trust me.
No, I know.
Oil. I love my coconut oil. Tinctures, moonshine tincture with the OG Kush and all that. Works really good when it comes down to pain.
And it won't kill you.
No, it won't.
How about that?
Not all the time either. It won't do all the other shit that painkillers do to you.
Hillary just testified to the Senate here in Canada, which she talked about a little bit on the last episode of Hash Church. I'm not sure of how many of you guys watched her 7-minute splur, but she mentioned in that about the brainstem and how that's one of the only places where the cannabinoid receptors aren't really in this concentrated amount, whereas there is a lot of opioid receptors, which is why fentanyl and heroin and Oxycontin can kill you because too many, it controls your breathing and your heart. So it was pretty interesting concept of why cannabinoids don't have that ability to, slow your breath down to the point where you're dead. Whereas I could definitely say after seeing Breeder Steve eat almost 15 grams of dry sift in a tray of brownies, it was actually 30 grams of dry sift in the whole tray, but he shared it with his buddy Wayne. Dude, he was up for 36 hours. And I even remember his wife like trying to listen for his breath because he was so like, I bet you could have operated on him. He was that out on edibles. I'm telling you, like it was insane. It was like, and how long do you wait, right? When you're like, okay, I know cannabis can't kill you, but he hasn't moved in 34 hours. Like this is beyond asleep. This is some next level shit.
Put the mirror under the nose.
Cannabis is no joke.
Oh my God.
It's no joke.
Bong rip.
True story.
Let's do a bong rip.
Yeah, I could hit a bong rip. I'm kind of digging these 2-hour hash churches. We have been pumping it out for a couple hours. Might do a bong rip and call it a day, unless anyone has something in particular they want to cover or get into. I don't mind doing that. Smoke a little full melt hash here.
It's too bad Indra dropped off. I wanted to ask him about his extractor. A lot of people ask me about it. Do you know anything that's going on lately, Mark?
I do, yeah. He keeps me updated all the time, and I would definitely let him share all about it next week when he comes on. But he's definitely he's built units. He's got units built, and they're looking pretty shiny and new, and they're looking pretty fucking crazy. I obviously am not a solvent extractor, but I'm sure once they get out to a group of different people will be able to talk about them. That's always really the tried and true. I know that Todd McCormick always doubted everything Indra said, always, just they would get into it really harshly. And for me, before I, met Indra online, through meeting him online, before I saw him face to face, the reason why I had belief in what he was doing was because of the defatted hemp seed oil that he sent me in the mail. And, I had it tested in 3 labs. I've told the story many times. And the protein powder isolate was like 10 to 12% higher than the company that was claiming they had the highest protein powder isolate in the world. I had never seen seed embryos intact, as he had defatted them without actually affecting their structure. So it wasn't like a seed cake, like cold pressed misnomer thing where they're heating it up and they're pressing it and then they're bouncing that cake on screens and collecting the protein powder isolate that way. His was just like whole embryos. It blew me away, having been invested and involved in the hemp industry since, the early 90s. I had never seen anything like it. His oil was as gold could be, which I had only seen when people ran through activated charcoal to get rid of that green color that you get from the cold press oil, from chlorophyll, I guess. His oil was the goldest I've ever seen. It was unbelievably tasty. It stayed it didn't go bad on the shelf for like an insanely long time. And so all those things combined had me thinking that Indra's the real deal, that if he could do that to hemp seed embryos, then he should be able to do that to all sorts of oil and fat containing seeds and resin type producing plants. So I'm going to have that bong rip now, D.
Yeah, I just know that, again, my client and friend Danny Moon, who watches Hash Church, was the first group to basically get the extractor, and they actually couldn't use it as is. I guess it was like before it was.
Yeah, they got the old extractor.
Yeah, I think it was full. It wasn't the one that was like fully certified or whatever, ratified or whatever. It wasn't ready for prime time yet. It was just a pre-production prototype, if you will.
Right.
But they ended up having to switch out their extractor, and they're using a different one. So I don't know where Danny's extractor is, if that's being. Yeah, Andrew's been really nice to keep me informed. Yeah, I probably get the same text that you get, Mark.
Yeah.
A bunch of different pictures of a shiny, big extractor in the factory and everything. I just don't know if any of them are actually out there in use, and it'd be great to get an update from John and see where things are on that, because
well, he'll come update us next week.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome that he can give that update too,
Yep.
Because a lot of people ask me about it all the time, and I don't know what to say. I say, well, I know the one didn't work out for Danny and those guys at Kurova, but that doesn't mean that the other ones are not working and out there today functioning. I just don't know if they are or not.
Well, we'll get him to come and give us an update.
Yeah, that would be great. I know that there was like a lot of, talk back and forth, and there was a picture of a extractor that had imploded, and some people thought it was Indra's extractor, but then Indra kind of fought back and said, no, that's not my extractor, and you guys are all a bunch of dumb shits.
That sounds like Indra.
Yeah, he doesn't have the nicest sort of approach sometimes on internet. He's,
agreed. I've felt the same thing. I've told him many times that you got to pull back. It takes time to learn about how to be on the internet sometimes. And I've had a few friends over the years. My one friend, who I won't even mention his name because I don't want to call him out, but he's just like the nicest person in person. And then I invited him onto my website years ago, and he just was like this troll that was just attacking everyone. And I was like, dude, like, I don't even know if I can follow you anymore. Like, you were just like trolling incessantly. That's weird, because that's not who you are in real life. But I guess it goes back to, the South Park episode where Stan's dad becomes the ultra troll. If you guys remember that episode and people are like, oh, he must be the most miserable man in the world. And then they show him like skipping down the road. Like he's just as happy can be, I guess, because he gets all his aggression and trolling out in the internet world. But kind of funny nonetheless. Made me laugh. If you haven't seen that South Park episode, check it out. It's a good one. It's actually a couple episodes, I believe, where he's the internet troll.
So here's a topic to what Mark routed stuff through the FDA. There's an interesting group called the Pineapple Fund that has been crypto funding a bunch of different projects, and they raised close to from maps to get MDMA and maybe even psilocybin through the FDA.
Oh wow, they're the ones that raised that money?
Yeah, they raised it for maps. It was a bit of I think it was a matching fund of but it ended up being like an $8 million fund, which I think you can see in this link on the I put on the chat room there.
Oh,
but
yeah.
and they're estimating that might be enough to actually defraying it through the phase 3 study. So I'm kind of curious where this is going to go, just because I don't know. I'm not really well read on the patent background of that molecule, but it's a pretty old one. So I would imagine if there were any patent.
Yeah, it's open art, and I think there's a full safety profile already developed on it. So it's like something that they'd have to like do a not an orphan drug thing, but there's a way of reapplying. It's already in the so-called Orange Book. The Orange Book is basically the book of active ingredients that already have FDA approval from which you can draw from to make commercial medicine. So it's in sort of the generic bucket, really. Outside of its scheduling with the DEA.
Yeah, that's not, I bet it's a lower schedule than cannabis right now, isn't it?
It is. It's Schedule 2.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You have to be a licensed pharmaceutical manufacturer with a Schedule 2 license to be able to make it. But, fuck it. It's like fucking Ritalin and Adderall. I mean, there's a lot of amphetamines in, the diet of people these days. So what the fuck?
I thought MAPS owned MDA or MMDA.
Shasta Shulgin was the one who discovered it, I'm pretty sure.
No, it was discovered a long time ago.
The patent for it.
Oh, okay.
It was discovered a real long time ago.
So what did he do? Rediscover it?
No, he found the application for it. So it was an application. And I think when it was first discovered, Mark, it was discovered as a racemic mixture. So both the right hand and left hand version. Shulgin actually made separated the right from the left hand versions. But yeah, composition of matter was already known. So these were just application, utility patents on the utility of these molecules.
Interesting.
And they also claim a myriad of analogs around them. So not just the active compounds themselves, but then what they'll do is they'll claim, say like there's a methyl group in the 4 position. Well, they'll claim an ethyl group. They'll also claim a propyl group and a butyl group. I mean, they'll blow it out to any group that can possibly exist there that they can make synthetically. And, one of, Shulgin's obvious, sort of claim to fame was all of the analoging work that he did around those nucleus. A lot of those compounds were made by a very sort of routine synthesis where he just started with a different starting material and ended up with a different product just because of the starting material had a different group there, and would bring it through the same synthesis. And then the great thing, obviously, is Shulgin would actually take it with his wife and then, write down comments in a diary and let everyone know what kind of effects these different substituents would have, and really develop his own structure-activity relationship. So it's cool. Cool stuff. Can't do that anymore, I guess.
Wow.
I don't know.
Well, we have been dabbling in the same field, and we recently got a grant from a cryptocurrency called Dash that is going to fund a lot of molecules. So we're going to see where that goes. That should be in the next 5 months or so. We'll be performing that work and putting all of it public. But Dash is doing this because they are trying to get into the cannabis banking industry because they feel it's kind of missed that. Transaction time in Bitcoin is like 10 minutes, so it doesn't really work at a dispensary. But Dash has these sub-second transaction speeds that can probably work point of sale. So they're going to be funding we'll have a crypto track there, so folks can go and learn more about how that currencies how it can potentially help the banking problems we've got down here. Are the banking problems easier up in Canada now that you guys are all legal?
I mean, yes and no. It still hasn't opened up completely. One of the largest banks, like the Royal Bank of Canada, has an intimate American banking relationship, so they have stayed away from it completely. And I think Bank of Montreal had also been staying away from it recently, until recently, where they just released a bunch of funds. They're opening up their doors now to cannabis business. I believe TD Bank does it. But when I say cannabis businesses, really like federally legal cannabis businesses, some of the dispensaries and people that are more in the gray market are not as confident. You kind of want to be careful how you approach banking if you have like a product that is basically a cannabis-based product. I myself had Royal Bank after 24 years just close all my accounts because they found out after 19 years of those 24 years that I was doing business with a product that people were using with cannabis. So just that alone was enough for them to close all my bank accounts. I know they did the same thing to Jody Emery and many, many others. So some people go with credit unions, some people go with TD, I guess Bank of Montreal now, but it still hasn't quite opened up to the point where you could choose the bank you want to choose to use and you have a cannabis-based business. So it's federal, but there's still that little bit of fear coming from the American side. I'm sure if we looked into how much of the money in Canada that's being invested in our licensed production facilities, I bet you it would be well over 50% of American money. Because, I mean, we all know America is the marketplace. Although on a world scale, there's a big world out there. Initially, America seems to be like the strong cannabis marketplace, in my opinion, at least anyway. And I'm sure that Canada being, positioned the way they are right now, having been involved in this industry for the last 10 years or whatever, they've jumped the gun a little bit to companies that might come behind them in a federally legal way. And I guess the most important part of the licensing here in Canada that I see the LPs appreciating is that they have export licenses. So, Canada's a small marketplace with 35 million. The rest of the world is a lot bigger with billions. So being able to ship to countries with reciprocity, laws that allow for cannabis to exist as a medicine seems like a pretty high value for those license holders.
Interesting. Yeah, they should have some. I think they have to get money transmitter licenses in every state.
Right.
Down here. So it's going to be when they drop in ATMs at various dispensaries. I think it's starting in Arizona and then going to California and Vegas after that. But there'll be more in that in a few months as it rolls out.
It is crazy how far the pushback has gone. You see when I saw hemp getting grown in Canada, I thought, oh, well, this is good. And then all of a sudden medical licensing and everything seemed to be moving along, but they're holding the doors closed for as long as they can humanly possibly hold those doors closed. And the doors I'm speaking of metaphorically are, opening up federal law with basically tax and banking. And you get those two things because without banking and tax, what you end up getting is money laundering and tax evasion. And so those are big crimes that they can hit you with, that for me would be a little bit scary doing business in a place that wasn't that didn't have federal exemptions.
Oh, we're making some progress. I mean, our employees right now are being paid by direct deposit directly into their checking accounts. They get an they get a notification by email that they've been paid. They can see a PDF of their pay stub and how much in taxes they're paying and other benefits and stuff. So it is becoming more normalized. I still think it needs to go a lot further because again, we don't enjoy all of the financial tools that a lot of other industries have for no reason whatsoever other than we're dealing with a Schedule I substance. We all know the picks and shovels argument, and really I find it interesting with you, Mark, because you're really a picks and shovels person. You're not growing or selling the plant for profit. You're selling a pick and a shovel. It's completely you know, what someone does with your product is what someone does with your product. It's like a connection that has to be made, again, in a decision somewhere in a bank office, probably in some high rise, that, oh, we need to not allow this interaction when what you're selling is totally legal and breaks no law and has no direct impact on something that's being sold that's underneath some antiquated drug law.
And to take it a step further, I'm also federally exempt by my government to be able to grow and process and extract resins from cannabis plants. So even if you were to use the argument, well, we saw the videos, this guy's totally promoting people to, you know, make hash with these bags, I have a license to do so. It's totally legal. And why shouldn't I be able to show other people who may or may not have licenses? I'm not the license police. I shouldn't have to check the people who are watching my videos to see if they have an ailment that allows them to be exempt by their government for to use cannabis. So it just sort of all made, you know, no sense to me when the banks just decided to cut me off like that. Huge pain in the ass.
I want to jump in here. I got to get off here in a few minutes, but I wanted to throw out two things. One of them is normalizing, something that Mark said. One of the things that's happening at a local level here in California, because we're in a rural area, is normalizing cannabis. Cannabis, for years, people had to hide what they were doing. And now that it's becoming legal, that's part of the evolution, if you will. And part of normalizing is like this coming Monday, I've been invited to tell the local Rotary Club, which is a conservative business organization in local towns. Our local Rotary Club wants to hear how to grow a cannabis plant. And I'm going to do a 20-minute presentation on how to care for a cannabis plant. And the local sheriff is a member of that club, actually. It'll be fun to see if he shows up. So that's one of the ways that I want to encourage everybody who's listening to normalize your work, normalize who you are, help people understand that cannabis is not about criminal behavior. It's about all kinds of different people. And I'm one of them, and all of you are one of them. The other thing I wanted to say is vote. That's how to change the banking laws. That's how to change the whole prohibitionist mindset that's shaped law around cannabis for so many years, is people need to get involved with the system and vote. I'm not going to tell anybody how to vote, but if enough people show up, we can change the situation that's going on in the United States and California at the moment in a positive way, is my belief. And I want to thank all of you for what you offer to my understanding of how this plant works in my life and in the people who are listening and the people I know and you know. This is sacred work. Anyone who's listening, this is sacred work. It's a sacred plant. And thank you for the invite, Marcus, and to all of you. Thank you for the science. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the experience. And I'm going to sign off at that point. Bye.
Hey, thanks for coming out, Wade. We do appreciate your time and your energy. And yeah, thank you, dude. Boom. And also, if you're going to vote, also, you should eat heroic doses of psilocybin mushrooms. Not every day, but definitely every once in a while. Every once in a while, you should just crush your own ego and go and learn some important things. I'm not going to tell you how to trip, but I am going to tell you, you should trip.
True that.
Well, speaking of voting, there's another form of voting going on in the world right now that I think is worth talking about, because I'm not in the States federally because I don't feel like it's really representative of the people anymore. But local voting, you can make a lot of impact, right? And so there was actually a local vote that was utilized to fund this cannabis So the Dash cryptocurrency was forked off of Bitcoin like in 2014. It's been growing faster than Bitcoin. But the one difference it has is the capacity for the people who have a lot of stake or a lot of coins in this ecosystem. They have the power to vote how to spend. So instead of giving all of the mining rewards to people who do mining like they do in Bitcoin, they actually take 10% of that money and put it into a treasury and let another group of people who can prove they have at least X amount of coins how to spend that. So a bunch of people submit applications on, hey, what if we use the currency for this X, Y, or Z thing? The group votes every month on what to fund, and they dole money out every 30 days based on how the network votes on what to do. Nodes in that network. So when you do the math, there's actually more representation in the cryptocurrency than there is in our U.S. government in terms of per capita people to representative ratios. And so I think it's an interesting new model on how we spend this cryptocurrency fountain that's out there, as opposed to how we spend the Federal Reserve fountain of money that's pumping out dollars, one after another. So anyway, my crypto democracy pitch, I'll just leave it.
Well, thanks for sharing, Kevin. It's definitely interesting. I've looked into cryptocurrency over the years. My friend just recently got rid of all his pot coins that he had. I can't remember what they ended up turning into, Bitcoins or something, and he ended up getting a substantial amount of money back from those things from years ago when he first turned me on to it. He was like, oh, you got to check out this pot coin. I was like, oh, really? Another cryptocurrency, but you know what? When they make it even more accessible, I mean, I've got the cryptocurrency wallets with the large statements that need to be made to open the wallet and whatnot. But it's just not as when I can just tap on the machine when I'm at the grocery store or whatever.
It's so much easier. They need to work on the UI.
When that happens and there's more, just someone's going to figure something out. I just started watching a show the other day that is hilarious that I could see maybe them doing the cryptocurrency version of it. But the Silicon Valley, I had never seen that show before.
Oh yeah. They have a bit of an affiliation or something that they're trying to start out of that. Is it the same one? Guilfoyle is in there.
Yeah, it's like the show's basically about it's like a comedy. This guy accidentally creates an algorithm that compresses anything at lossless, like there's no loss in the compression. But he doesn't really know what he's got. And so the show's on HBO, I think. It fucking made me laugh so hard. I was at a friend's house. I don't have cable TV for that matter. I'll download shows every once in a while, but just seeing this show was very funny, and just how these things happen and how people try to take advantage of them, and how sometimes things are just accidentally created for a platform that, it was never really intended for. Hopefully someone does that. The same way BitTorrent opened up, downloading. That was a game changer from downloading. The way we were accessing information when BitTorrent came out, it changed everything and made it so much easier to download information. That was a big change.
Well, I think it's refreshing that we're seeing these tools being used to fund things that our governments won't. And I think that's a step in the right direction.
100%. Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's really cool. I guess at that point, is it just like a super secret group that people don't know anything about, so you don't really have any idea where that money's coming from? Or it's kind of like they're a little bit more transparent and they kind of let you know who they are?
Well, it's all on a blockchain, and so that blockchain is basically just when it mints money every month, it happens to mint a treasury. And in the case of Dash, I think it's like 6,100 Dash or something every month that gets voted on. So that's getting literally minted right off the blockchain. They're just voters that are involved in deciding which direction and which addresses it goes to. It's hardly a taxable entity that's issuing those, but the masternode folks, some are known and some are anonymous. So the people doing the voting, you don't always know who they are. That can be difficult when you submit a proposal to them. If you don't know your audience, it's hard for an application. Ours was pretty dense about sequencing, and I don't think a lot of people there fully understood or cared to understand the details. All they really wanted to see was that how can you demonstrate this will improve the transaction rate of Dash, and we're doing something on this review that's all done on crypto, where it's just the bounties for peer review are put out for researchers. We pay the researchers to do the reviews, and they bypass the journals and just put the reviews directly online. And that keeps it copyright so that the genome free without having any journal have an ownership over it. But it's a different way to do peer review. And if you do the numbers on how much peer review gets done, it's like it's a $20 billion a year market. Like there's a bunch of money being pumped. I mean, half the papers can't be reproduced.
I like how it's disruptive.
Yeah. Got to cut some people out of the mix, you know. And I think right now the copyrights are creating more harm than good. You know, they're effectively, they don't pay the reviewers anything, so they're dependent on reviewers doing stuff for them for free. They charge $3,000 usually, and about if it is behind a paywall, it's like $50. So there's a host of bad actors that you know, this has resulted in Aaron Swartz committing suicide. There's just a host of copyright trolling that's gone on that's been very disruptive to the economy and to just the progress of mankind. That if we can free scientific literature from being embedded in that mesh, I think it's a big step forward. But it's an experiment. It could fail. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's cool that it's happening nonetheless. Maybe it fails and morphs into the next thing that will succeed, or maybe it just succeeds.
Yeah, it could.
Very cool. Well, guys, 500 viewers still in the room checking us out. I think we've been going for a couple 2.5 hours, and I'm pretty good to go and kind of go and enjoy my Sunday now that we've had a good hash church and a conversation. I do appreciate all of you guys. Dr. Mark holding it down for almost a full hour, giving us the breakdown on hydrogenated cannabinoids and terpenes. Do appreciate you for coming in and sharing your time with us. And Kevin and Wade and Johnny B and D420K and Skunkman Sam. We had Indra in for a short period. Thank you guys all for coming in and talking about interesting things on a Sunday afternoon with me. I really appreciate it, and I know the audience does as well. So feel free to say goodbye, everyone. I'm out of here. May the full melt bless your bowl sooner than later. Peace out.
Long rip.
It's great to be back.
Peace.